Hello everyone and welcome to the Canadian Redneck channel. My name's Dave and today we have a 203 Perkins engine here that we're going to be putting a crank in. So I've got it in the engine stand right now. I'm going to flip it over upside down so we can get at the oil pan. So I'll drop the oil pan, pull the caps and get the crank out of there. Always good to have a handy container for putting bolts in. Coffee cans come in real handy for that. The crank is now ready to remove from the block. We have all the main bearing caps and the rod bearing caps off, and I've placed them all in order underneath the block. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to make them out or not, but they are all numbered. Yeah, there we go. I think you can see the number there. Anyway, they're all numbered, and so and the numbers all go on the same side. Which is the side towards the injector pump in this case. Anyway, the numbers all go on the same side for the mains and the rods. And the reason we're changing this crank is right back here, where the oil seal runs. This is badly worn here. It's been an issue, an ongoing issue. They've changed the rear seal a couple of times, and that wasn't working. It still leaks oil badly. So we're going to change out the crank and try to get that leak fixed. There was another issue also I saw, is the rear seal retainer plate is warped up in here. It's got a 1/4 inch lift away from the block, so that's certainly not going to help anything. I'll put another one of those in there. And they went and put a shim inside the groove for some reason. Try to tighten up the seal, I guess. And I can't imagine that's being helpful either. Anyway, we also wanted the crank out so we get a casting number. Now I see there's a casting number, looks like a casting number stamped in here, although they're usually raised out. The numbers are cast right into the crank when it's cast. So I'm going to pull that out and check for any other numbers on there also, and go from that. And then these, there's 2 or 3 different styles of thrust washer, and these ones here have the numbers right on them, so that'll definitely be helpful when ordering new parts. So anyway, I'll get these things checked out, get our crank and parts and stuff ordered for it, and we'll start putting back together. Here we have our shiny new crank ready to go back into the Perkins engine. I've cleaned this crank up. They come coated in Cosmoline. All you Milsurp guys can appreciate that. So we give it a good bath with some brake clean, get the Cosmoline off so that all the surfaces are ready to go. And you can see much better surface in there for the seal to run on. This should solve the guy's problem. And I will take you here to the block now where we have it prepared. Okay, we have the block here pretty much prepared for the crank to sit back in. I've placed most of the new main bearings in place. I have pushed the pistons as far to the top of their stroke in this case, because the engine's upside down, so that there's room to set the crank in without scarring the journals. You know, make sure we don't get any kind of marks on the rod journals. And at the front of the engine here, I've taken out the idler gears and started lining up all the timing marks. Put the first idler gear back in, and I put some yellow paint on the timing marks so you can make them out a little easier. And I've left the in this case it'd be the bottom timing gear, the idler gear, out, so we can put the crank in, get everything moved around to place, and then last thing we'll put in that idler gear, and we can have our timing marks all lined up so that the engine is in time and ready to fire up as soon as it's put back in the tractor. So I will set the camera up where hopefully you can see and I can have my hands free to work, and we'll get started. Like I said, I've got all the main bearings in except for the last one. I left it loose so I can show you the process. On this particular engine, there's 3 different sizes, 3 different widths to the main bearings. Most of them are obvious. This one here was a little less so, but it becomes obvious because the front journal is the only place where the oil hole in the bearing lines up. For putting in the bearings, you locate, there's a tab on the bearing and a notch in the block, and that tab on the bearing, it contacts the cap when you bolt it down, and that is to keep this from spinning inside the block rather than the crank spinning inside the bearing. So you put the lock in the notch, slide it down in carefully with your hands, make sure it's even and bottomed out, and then it's going to protrude a little bit past the block. You want that protrusion equal on each side, and I mean it's kind of hard to judge because it's just a couple of thousandths out of, you know, each side, but mainly you get it pretty close. As long as it's protruding relatively equally on both sides, you're good to go. And I probably didn't mention yet, but when you're reassembling the engine, cleanliness is next to godliness. Keep your hands clean. Keep a clean rag around to keep your hands clean. Keep the dirt out of the engine. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on these main bearings so there's a little bit of lubrication there on initial startup before the oil pump gets a chance to start picking up oil and putting it through the engine. So it just needs a squirt on each one. You just give it a rub around so there's a film on there. Another step in prepping the crank is we had to remove the timing gear, and there's a spacer on there. We had to remove them from the old crank along with the key, and so now we have to place them on the new crank in preparation to put it in. Okay, so we'll put the key carefully in the keyway. We want to get it even, and just carefully tap it in place. There we go, I think that's pretty good. And we can slide the collar down, and that'll kind of tell us how we are with the key. There we are. Step 1. Yep. Started. Yep. You can hear the different tone when you get to the bottom, get it all the way on. These engines have separate thrust bearings from the main bearings. A lot of engines use a shouldered main bearing for your thrust bearing, which is a lot better system because these stupid things just sit in there and float around, which is dumb. But anyway, get a steel back on one side and the bearing surface on the other. Just be mindful when you put them in which way you're putting them. The bearing surface goes towards the crank, the steel back goes towards the block. So I'm going to use just a little dab of grease on the back side of the bearing to hold it into place. Just take your finger and rub a light film of grease on it. And that will effectively stick it to the block. That is the hopes, at least. There's one. I didn't point out on the first one, there's two different shapes to the bearings. One of them has a tab on it here, and the others are plain, just round horseshoe shape. The one with the tab goes on the main bearing cap. There's a notch in the cap for the tab to hold it in place. So now, I'll carefully set that in. I've got number 1 and number 4 connecting rods this way towards me, number 2 and 3 that way away from me, and I arranged the rod journals on the crank so that they're the opposite way, so that they'll be well clear for setting it in, hopefully. And then we carefully set that down in the bearings. There. And we're able to do that, keeping the thrust washers in place. So now we set the main caps on. And again, you want to make sure they're good and clean. Putting a bearing shell into the cap. Making sure the ends are evenly spaced against the end of the cap. And this one here, we'll have to put the thrust washers on. And you can see the notch in the cap for the tab on the bearing. And a little spot of oil. Smear that around. And carefully place that. Okay, let's tighten the bolts finger tight for now. Now that all the main caps are in place, just visually double check everything, make sure everything's lining up right, your numbers on the caps are in the appropriate positions, and after a visual check that everything's good, it's time to start torquing the bolts down. I'm fortunate enough to have a book for this engine that gives me the information. If you don't have the book for it, for whatever engine you're working on, usually a local engine shop will have information and often are willing to help out, or sometimes the parts houses are, or a local tractor dealership or what have you. The torque specs for this engine calls for 90 foot-pounds. I'm going to do that in 3 steps. I'm going to bring them all to 45, and then to 60, and then to 90. I have a micrometer style torque wrench, which works very nice. You don't have to try to hold your hand over a gauge to really gauge. You dial in the specified torque that you're looking for in the little windows here, and when you reach the specified torque, there's a release here. You feel and hear a bit of a click. It's a little harder to feel it at the lower torque settings, so you have to really pay attention when you're at the lower torque settings. It becomes more obvious at the higher settings. So we just carefully, there's the release. There it is there. There we go. That's the first step. We're going to ratchet that on up to, I'll go to 65. That puts us a little nearer halfway between. There we go. And we'll go on to 90. The book says between 90 and 95, so I'm actually going to go to 92. There it is. Alright. Main bearings are torqued. And after you use it, you always want to take the pressure off the spring in your torque wrench. Step is to get the your rod bearings down into your rods, which is going to be a little bit tricky because we've got them stuffed down in there underneath the crank. Now, just like the main bearings, they're going to protrude a little bit on each side, and it's important to try to get that as even as possible. An extendable magnet is helpful when you do something stupid like drop a nut down in on top of a piston, down inside a piston, so you can fish them back out. There we go. Get that relatively even. And again, a little dab of oil. Okay, this is number 4 connecting rod. So you make sure you get number 4 rod cap. They're all numbered. The numbers go the same way, which in this case is away from the camshaft. And it's going to work out best if you do them in pairs of 1 and 4 and 3 and 2. That way they're the ones that travel together, and when you get one pair done, either 1 and 4 or 3 and 2, then you can roll the crank a little bit more. You have a little more freedom of movement with the crank. We have our second rod cap on, so now we can turn the crank. We have a little more freedom of movement with our crank here. We can turn the crank a bit, make it a little easier for the second 2 rods. The spec for these call 45 to 50, so I'm gonna, shoot for right around the middle. I'm gonna go 48, and I'm gonna do that in 2 steps again. I'm gonna bring it to 30 first. Reaching over the engine like this is a bit of a nuisance, but if you can get away with it at all, you don't want to use an extension, because the extension will absorb some of the torque, and you won't get 100% true reading. We're ready for our final step on these, which is 45 to 50 foot-pounds, and so I'm going to go with 48 on these. And we're torqued. All of these main caps, all the bolts have a lock on for them, and I find the simplest way to close them is a nice set of channel lock pliers. You can get behind the head of the bolt, grab the tab, fold it up around, and get a good lock on it. We're ready now to time the engine, finish timing the engine. And like I said, I put paint marks on the gears so it's easier to make out the timing marks. On the final idler gear, there are 2 timing marks. It's always important to note these 2 marks here fall in the groove between the teeth. The mark on the crank gear is on the tooth. The mark on this idler gear is on the tooth, and you make sure you line up the tooth with the groove, the corresponding groove on the other gear. So this gear is going to line up right here with this one. So we're going to bring the timing mark on the crank gear down around to here. Put a little oil on that. There we are. Engine is timed. We're ready to put the oil pump back on now, and to do that we'll have to take off the gear, the driving gear that sits on the crankshaft gear. It's got a half moon key on it here. Carefully slip it off so that it doesn't go flying, and you set those pieces aside. The bolts for the oil pump have a very thin head, about half the thickness of a standard bolt, so you want to make sure you get those fished out for the oil pump. So you carefully slip your gear back in place, line up teeth, washer goes on, and your half moon snap clip. We're ready to place the oil pan back on now. You want to get your gaskets set out. Most of these gasket sets work for more than one application. They change the castings for the block and for the for the covers and so on over time. And so you'll have to sort out and find the gasket set that fits your application. We've got the oil pan bolted down now, and we're ready to move on to the front engine plate. But before we do that, I'm going to mention a couple of things. Before you start reassembling things, make sure you get your gasket surfaces good and clean. A regular scraper will do that, or like a Dremel tool with a surfacing disc. I use a die grinder, which is basically just an air-powered Dremel tool, and it's got a surfacing disc on. You want to be careful of the aluminum plates. Don't get too aggressive with them because you can scar them up pretty easily. It's pretty soft metal. Another thing is, a lot of people ask, what do you put on gaskets when you put them on? My short answer is nothing. I like to put them on dry. That way they bond right directly to the metal and get you the best possible seal. And there's one little thing, one step that I forgot to mention when we were putting the oil pan on. I'm going to pick the camera up and get you a view of that. At the back end of the oil pan, there's this rounded arch in here that seals to the oil pan. I forgot to mention it before I put the oil pan on, because I forgot to put it on before I put the oil pan on. I had to lift the back end of the oil pan on. It fits in there with a bolt on either side, and then there's a cork gasket, just a little cork strip lays in a groove on it all the way around. You tighten the oil pan against that, and that's what seals the oil pan at the back. Cover goes on in two pieces. There's a bottom half that goes against the oil pan and the top half covering the timing gears. I'm going to start with the top half, so I've put a few bolts in at this other part of the gasket to hold everything in shape. And one of the gas bolts that holds the power steering pump on, I've put through here to hold the gasket in place. And we'll grab a couple of bolts and get that pan started. With a big gasket surface like this, it's a good idea to just get the bolt started a few threads. That leaves you room so that you can wiggle the gasket around and get everything in place well. Put a new seal in the front seal retainer, and it goes in here now. It fits on an O-ring, so there's no need for gasket. And so before I tighten any of this other stuff up, I will slip that right in there. Now that everything's in place, you can go ahead and start tightening the bolts up. We are now ready for the front pulley. You want to check out where the key is, line up the keyway in the pulley. This is one of the few things in the reassembly that you want to use an air wrench for. You can get it torqued down good and tight without having to try to hold the crank. We're finally ready to attack the thing that caused all the trouble in the first place. We're ready to put the rear seal in. We start off with putting the gasket in for the retainers. It just sits in there. The seal is a rope, two-piece rope seal. Half of it goes in each retainer. And you can tell they're getting all kinds of white powder on my hands off that. They're pre-lubricated with a kind of a powder lubricant, and they are longer than necessary, so you get them fit down in as good as you can, and Once you get them into place, you want to leave, yeah, probably about an eighth of an inch or a touch more out one end. Fit it in as best you can all the way around. And then trim the other end to about an eighth of an inch as well. Gives you a little bit sticking out each end. That way when you bolt the two halves together, and you'll do the same thing on the other one, like I said, you want about an eighth of an inch sticking out each end. That way when you bolt the halves together, gives it room to draw into the groove a little bit more, and they'll seal up well against the ends. So I'm carefully going to fit the two halves around the crank. You got to keep in mind, you want to keep this gasket behind out of the road. We've got our engine back together now. That's the process of replacing a crank in a 203 Perkins engine. Pretty similar to most other engines, really. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful and informative. Found some tips maybe to help the job easier for you. As always, like, subscribe, share with your friends. Have a great day.